Before Netflix became the company that changed how the world watches movies and series, it was a risky idea that many people believed would never work. Today, streaming feels obvious, almost inevitable, but in the late 1990s, the internet was slow, DVDs were new, and most people still drove to physical stores to rent movies. The idea that one company could one day replace video rental stores around the world sounded unrealistic, expensive, and close to impossible. And if you enjoy discovering the real stories behind the things you use every day, stories that almost ended very differently, this channel is for you. So consider subscribing, because here we don't just talk about what exists, we explore how it started and why it almost didn't. Back then, entertainment followed a simple and familiar routine. If you wanted to watch a movie, you went to a store like Blockbuster, walked through long aisles of plastic cases, hoped your movie was not already rented, and then rushed to return it on time to avoid late fees. Those late fees were not a small detail of the business. They were a core part of how video rental chains made money. Millions of people paid them every year, often more than the cost of the rental itself. It was frustrating, but it was normal, and almost nobody seriously questioned this system or imagined that it could be replaced by a website. Reed Hastings, one of Netflix's future founders, experienced this frustration personally. According to the well-known story, he once paid a late fee for returning a movie too late, and that small, annoying moment planted a much bigger idea in his mind. Why should people be punished for returning movies late? Why couldn't renting movies be simpler, more fair, and more convenient? Around the same time, DVDs were beginning to replace VHS tapes. They were smaller, lighter, and more durable. And most importantly, they were easy to ship by mail. That single technological change quietly opened the door to a completely new business model. Together with Mark Randolph, Hastings began exploring an idea that sounded strange for that time. What if people could choose movies on a website and receive them at home by mail? No physical stores, no late fees, no driving across town. Just pick a movie online, wait for it to arrive, watch it, and send it back whenever you were done. On paper, the idea sounded simple and elegant. In reality, it sounded slow, risky, and expensive. The internet was still young. Many people did not trust online payments, and building a nationwide shipping operation for fragile disks looked like a logistical nightmare. In 1997, Netflix was born as a DVD by-mail company, not a streaming service. The early website allowed users to browse a catalog and order movies that would be delivered to their homes. At first, the business model looked similar to a normal rental store, just without the physical location. Customers paid per rental, and Netflix tried to compete mainly on convenience. But very quickly, problems started to appear. The costs of shipping were high, the margins were thin, and growth was slower than the founders had hoped. The company was burning money, and it was not clear whether this strange idea could ever become a sustainable business. It soon became obvious that simply copying the old rental model on the internet was not enough. Netflix needed something that traditional video stores could not easily copy. That's when the company made one of the most important decisions in its history, switching to a subscription model. Instead of paying per rental, customers would pay a monthly fee and could rent as many DVDs as they wanted, with no late fees at all. You could keep a movie as long as you liked, and when you sent it back, the next one in your queue would be shipped automatically. This changed renting movies from a series of small transactions into an ongoing service. At the time, this decision looked extremely dangerous. Late fees were a massive source of profit for the entire industry, and Netflix was choosing to remove them completely. Unlimited rentals sounded like an open invitation for abuse, and the logistics of constantly shipping DVDs back and forth at scale were incredibly complex and expensive. But this model changed how customers felt about the service. Instead of feeling rushed and stressed, people felt free to explore movies at their own pace. And that emotional shift turned out to be one of Netflix's biggest advantages. Even with this new model, Netflix was still in a very fragile position. The company was losing money, and the dot-com bubble was about to burst. Investors were becoming cautious, technology companies were failing one after another, and funding was getting harder to find. Netflix was not a giant. It was a small, risky startup with high costs, thin margins, and an uncertain future. The pressure became so intense that the founders decided to approach the one company that seemed impossible to compete with: Blockbuster. The proposal was simple and almost unbelievable. Netflix offered to sell itself to Blockbuster for around $50 million and help them build an online version of their business. Blockbuster, confident in its massive network of stores and its dominant position in the market, did not take the offer seriously. To them, Netflix looked small, unproven, and unnecessary. Why would anyone want to rent movies by mail when there were stores everywhere? That decision would later become one of the most famous missed opportunities in business history. After being rejected, Netflix had no choice but to keep going alone. The company had to survive, improve its logistics, grow its subscriber base, and convince people that this new way of renting movies was not only convenient, but better. Progress was slow and often uncertain, but it was real. More people started to sign up. The subscription model created loyalty, and customers began to build long lists of movies they wanted to watch. Netflix was no longer just an experiment. It was becoming a serious competitor. For a while, the DVD buy mail business saved the company, but the founders always knew that this was not the final destination. The real vision was much bigger: delivering movies instantly over the internet. The problem was that the technology simply was not ready yet. Internet connections were too slow, data was expensive, and watching full movies online felt unrealistic for most people. Still, Netflix kept preparing quietly, investing in software, infrastructure, and long-term strategy, waiting for the right moment. When streaming finally became practical, Netflix faced another dangerous decision. Moving to streaming meant risking the very business that had kept the company alive. DVDs were still profitable, and many companies would have tried to protect that model for as long as possible. Netflix chose the opposite path. It began pushing users towards streaming, even though this meant the DVD business would slowly shrink. In other words, Netflix decided to replace its own successful product before someone else could. This moment is where many companies fail. They become prisoners of their own success, too afraid to change, too comfortable with what already works. Netflix survived because it was willing to accept short-term pain for long-term survival. Streaming was cheaper for users, more convenient, and infinitely more scalable. And once people experienced how easy it was to watch movies instantly, there was no going back. Looking back, it's clear how close this story came to ending very differently. If the subscription model had failed, if investors had disappeared during the crash, if Blockbuster had taken the threat seriously earlier, or if streaming technology had arrived a few years later, Netflix might simply be remembered as another failed startup from the early internet era. Instead, it became one of the most influential media companies in the world. Netflix did not succeed because everything went according to plan. It succeeded because it kept changing, kept adapting, and kept betting on the future, even when those bets looked uncomfortable or dangerous. What started as a risky idea to mail DVDs became a company that reshaped global entertainment. And that's why the story of Netflix is not really about movies or technology. It's about how close success to failure often are, and how the biggest transformations usually begin with ideas that look like mistakes.